The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the Texas plains as Ryder O'Malley spotted something unusual on the horizon, a horse moving erratically, its gait uneven and desperate. Squinting against the dying light, he could just make out a figure slumped over the animal's neck. Without hesitation, Ryder dug his heels into his stallion's flanks, racing toward what he now recognized as trouble. The year was 1875, and life in Fort Davis, Texas, had hardened Ryder into the man he was today, 30 years old, self-sufficient, and deliberately solitary. The war had ended a decade ago, but its ghosts still haunted the land and the people who called it home. As he drew closer, the situation became clearer. The horse was a beautiful chestnut mare, her coat darkened with sweat and what appeared to be blood along her left flank. The rider, a woman with long auburn hair spilling from beneath a wide-brimmed hat, was barely conscious, clutching weakly at the horse's mane. "Whoa there!" Ryder called out, bringing his horse alongside the struggling mare. The animal's eyes were wild with fear and exhaustion, but she slowed at the presence of another horse, her instincts recognizing potential safety. The woman lifted her head slightly, revealing a face streaked with dirt and blood. Her eyes, a startling green even in the fading light, met his briefly before rolling back. Without warning, she slipped from the saddle. Ryder reacted instantly, leaning dangerously from his mount to catch her before she hit the ground. The sudden movement spooked the already terrified mare, who reared up, exposing a deep gash in her hind leg. Ryder managed to grab the mare's reins with his free hand, steadying both horse and unconscious rider in a precarious balancing act. "Easy now," he murmured, assessing the situation. The woman was alive but injured, and the mare wouldn't last long without attention to that wound. His homestead was about 3 miles back, the closest shelter in this unforgiving stretch of West Texas. With practiced efficiency, Ryder secured the woman across his saddle, then tied the mare's reins to his horse. "Let's get you both somewhere safe," he said, mostly to himself, as he turned back toward home. The journey was slow and tense. The mare stumbled several times, forcing Ryder to halt and coax her forward. The woman remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady against his arm. By the time his cabin came into view, night had fully descended, and the first stars pricked the vast Texas sky. Ryder's homestead was modest but well-built, a solid cabin with a small barn and corral beside it. He'd built it himself after returning from the war, seeking solitude and peace away from the growing town of Fort Davis. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, which suited him fine. He dismounted carefully, keeping the woman from falling, and carried her to the porch. After settling her on the bench there, he returned for the horses. The mare needed immediate attention. She was trembling, her wounded leg barely touching the ground. "Come on, girl," he encouraged, leading both horses to the barn. Once inside, he lit a lantern and hung it from a hook, illuminating the mare's injury. The cut was deep, likely from barbed wire or a sharp branch, and would need cleaning and stitching. Ryder worked quickly, removing her saddle and bridle, then fetching water and his medical supplies. As he cleaned the wound, the mare whinnied in pain but didn't kick or pull away. "You're a brave one, aren't you?" Ryder murmured, impressed by her temperament despite her suffering. "Just like your mistress, I'd wager." With the horses tended to for now, Ryder returned to the porch where the woman lay motionless. In the soft glow spilling from the cabin windows, he could see her more clearly. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with delicate features and a small scar across her chin. Her clothes were quality riding gear, dusty from the trail but well made. Lifting her carefully, he carried her inside and placed her on his bed. A quick examination revealed a nasty gash on her forehead and bruising along her right side, but no bullet wounds or broken bones that he could detect. She'd likely been thrown and then managed to remount before shock and blood loss took their toll. Ryder fetched water and clean cloths, then gently cleaned the blood from her face. As he worked, she stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Your horse is safe too. You're at my homestead outside Fort Davis." Her eyes opened fully then, confusion giving way to alarm as she tried to sit up. Easy, Ryder cautioned, placing a hand on her shoulder. You've had a fall. My mare, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Penny. Is she? She's injured but alive. I've cleaned her wound, and she's resting in the barn. Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by wariness. Who are you? Ryder O'Malley. I found you about 3 miles east of here, barely staying on your horse. He handed her a cup of water. And you are? She took a small sip before answering. Abigail Newcomb. She winced as she shifted position. I was heading to Fort Davis from San Antonio when we were set upon by men wanting my horse. I managed to escape, but Penny caught herself on something in the darkness. Ryder nodded. Horse thieves are common enough. You're lucky to have gotten away. He stood and moved toward the stove. You should rest. I'll fix something to eat. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley, but I don't want to impose. If you could just point me toward town in the morning. Miss Newcomb, Ryder interrupted. Your mare won't be fit to travel for at least a week, maybe longer, and you're in no condition to walk to Fort Davis. Abigail's face fell as the reality of her situation sank in. A week? At minimum, that cut was deep. She'll need time to heal. She bit her lip, clearly calculating her options and finding them few. I can pay you for your trouble, she offered finally. Ryder waved away the suggestion. No need. I couldn't leave a woman and a wounded horse to fend for themselves. It wouldn't be right. He turned back to the stove, adding wood to build the fire. Now rest. Food will be ready soon. Abigail leaned back against the pillow, her independence warring with the practicality of her situation. I'm not accustomed to being helpless, she admitted quietly. Ryder glanced back at her, a hint of amusement crossing his usually stern features. I don't imagine you are, Miss Newcomb, but everyone needs help sometimes, even in the West. By morning, Abigail's condition had improved, though she moved gingerly as she insisted on getting up. Ryder had slept on a bedroll near the fireplace, giving her the only bed. He was already outside tending to the horses when she emerged from the cabin, squinting in the bright Texas sunlight. She found him in the barn, changing the dressing on Penny's leg. The mare nickered softly when she saw her mistress, and Abigail rushed to her side, running gentle hands over her neck. She's doing well, Ryder said, finishing his work. No signs of infection. She's tough. Like me, Abigail smiled weakly. We've been through a lot together. Ryder stood, wiping his hands on a cloth. I imagine so. Not many women travel alone across Texas. I'm not most women, she replied, a hint of defiance in her tone. I gathered that. Ryder's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected something like respect. May I ask what brings you to Fort Davis? Family waiting? Abigail shook her head. No family. I'm here to start a school. The town council wrote that they needed a teacher urgently. This surprised him. You're the new school teacher? The town's been waiting on you for nearly a month. The arrangements took longer than expected. Then there was the matter of suitable transportation. She stroked Penny's mane. I couldn't bear to travel by stagecoach. Too confining. Ryder nodded, understanding her preference for freedom. Well, Miss Newcomb, you're welcome to stay until both you and Penny are fit to continue. I'll ride into town today and let them know you've arrived, albeit delayed. That's very kind, but unnecessary. I hate to trouble you further. It's no trouble. I need supplies anyway. He hesitated, then added, unless you'd prefer I didn't mention your whereabouts? Abigail considered this. Those men who attacked me, they might still be looking. All the more reason for you to stay put until Penny heals. Ryder's tone was matter-of-fact. I'll be discreet. Later that morning, Ryder saddled his horse and prepared for the ride to town. Before leaving, he showed Abigail where everything was in the cabin and gave her his rifle. Just in case, he said. Though it's unlikely anyone will come by. Most folks know I value my privacy. Abigail took the weapon confidently. I know how to use it. I don't doubt that, Miss Newcomb. With a tip of his hat, Ryder mounted and rode toward Fort Davis. The town had grown since its early days as a military outpost. While the fort itself still housed soldiers, the surrounding settlement had expanded to include shops, a hotel, and various businesses catering to travelers and settlers alike. Ryder avoided coming to town when possible, preferring the solitude of his homestead, but he maintained cordial relations with the shopkeepers and the sheriff. At the general store, as Ryder collected his supplies, the owner, Bill Tucker, engaged him in conversation. "Haven't seen you in a while, O'Malley. Everything all right out your way?" "Fine enough," Ryder replied, selecting coffee beans and flour. "Heard you've been expecting a new school teacher." Tucker's eyes lit up with interest. "Indeed we have. Children have been running wild without proper schooling. Council hired a woman from back east somewhere, supposed to have arrived weeks ago. Beginning to think she changed her mind." "She'll be here," Ryder said carefully. "Might be delayed by travel troubles." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "You know something I don't, O'Malley." "Just a feeling," Ryder deflected, moving to examine a shelf of canned goods. "Any strangers passed through recently? Besides the expected schoolmarm, I mean." "Few drummers, usual travelers. Oh, and a rough bunch came through 2 days ago, looking for a stolen horse, they claimed." Tucker leaned closer. "Sheriff didn't much like the look of them. Sent them on their way quick enough." Ryder nodded, filing away this information. "They say what kind of horse?" "Chestnut mare, if I recall. Fine breeding. Said it was taken by a thief heading this way." Tucker shrugged. "Seemed mighty interested in finding it." After completing his purchases, Ryder made one more stop at the sheriff's office. Sheriff James Wilson was a fair man who had earned the respect of the townspeople through his steady handling of the occasional troubles that arose. "O'Malley," the sheriff greeted him. "To what do I owe this rare visit?" Ryder closed the door behind him. "Heard about some men looking for a stolen horse." Wilson's expression darkened. "Nasty bunch. Said they represented a horse breeder from San Antonio, but their story didn't hold water. More likely they're the thieves themselves, chasing down someone who got away." "Any idea where they headed?" "Said they were moving on to El Paso." Wilson studied Ryder's face. "Why the interest? You see something out your way?" Ryder chose his words carefully. "Just curious. I value knowing who's passing through the area." The sheriff nodded. Accepting this explanation without pushing further, he knew Ryder well enough to respect his reticence. Before leaving town, Ryder made one last stop at the schoolhouse, a modest building that had stood empty for nearly a year since the previous teacher had married and moved away. The town council had eventually secured funding for a new teacher, advertising back east for qualified candidates. The building needed work-broken windows, a sagging porch, and neglected interiors. Ryder made a mental note of the repairs needed as he walked through the dusty rooms. When Abigail finally arrived in town, she would face an uphill battle getting this place ready for students. On the ride home, Ryder's thoughts kept returning to his unexpected guest. There was something compelling about Abigail Newcomb, a determination in her eyes that spoke of someone who had overcome obstacles before and would do so again. He found himself curious about her story, what had led a young woman to travel alone to a frontier town to teach children she'd never met. As the sun began its descent, Ryder's cabin came into view. Smoke curled from the chimney, and he could see Abigail in the doorway, watching for his return. The sight stirred something unfamiliar in his chest, a warmth he quickly attributed to the satisfaction of returning home after a long ride. "You've been busy," he observed as he dismounted, noting the swept porch and washed windows. Abigail smiled. "I don't like being idle, and I wanted to repay your hospitality somehow." She gestured toward the cabin. "I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of preparing dinner." Inside, the cabin had been transformed. The floors were swept clean, his few possessions neatly arranged, and a stew bubbled on the stove, filling the air with a savory aroma that reminded him how long it had been since he'd enjoyed a properly cooked meal. "You didn't have to do all this," Ryder said, unpacking his supplies. "I wanted to," Abigail replied simply. "How was town? Did anyone ask about me?" Ryder recounted his conversations, including the information about the men seeking a chestnut mare. Abigail's face paled at this news. "They're still looking," she murmured. "I hope they might have given up. Sheriff thinks they've moved on to El Paso, but it wouldn't hurt to be cautious." Ryder hesitated. "Miss Newcomb, I think there's more to your story than horse thieves." Abigail busied herself with the stew, avoiding his gaze. "It's complicated. Most things worth talking about are." He didn't press further, sensing her reluctance. "The schoolhouse needs work. Broken windows, damaged furniture. Town council doesn't seem to have prepared much for your arrival." She sighed. "I'm not surprised. The correspondent suggested they were eager for a teacher, but short on funds." A determined expression crossed her face. "No matter. I can manage with what's available." They ate dinner together, the conversation gradually shifting to lighter topics. Ryder found himself speaking more than he had in months, perhaps years. Abigail was an attentive listener, drawing him out with thoughtful questions about the area, his ranch, and the community in Fort Davis. "You don't go to town often," she observed, helping him clean up after the meal. "No need," Ryder replied. "Got everything I need here." "Don't you get lonely?" The question caught him off guard. "Got used to my own company. After the war, crowds don't sit well with me anymore." Understanding filled her eyes. "You fought?" He nodded. "Union cavalry. Came west afterward like many did. Wanted open space and quiet." "And you found it here?" Abigail glanced around the cabin. "It's beautiful land." "It is," Ryder agreed, "though it demands respect. Desert doesn't forgive mistakes." As the days passed, a routine developed between them. Mornings began with tending to Penny, whose wound was healing well under Ryder's careful attention. Abigail insisted on helping with chores, proving herself capable at everything from cooking to mending to caring for the horses. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in impossible colors. Ryder found himself looking forward to these quiet moments, when Abigail would sometimes share stories from her past, her childhood in Pennsylvania, her training as a teacher, her dream of bringing education to children on the frontier. "My father was a professor," she explained one evening. "He believed education was the greatest gift one could give. After he died last year, I decided to honor his memory by bringing that gift to places where it's needed most." "Your mother?" Ryder asked. "Passed when I was 14. It was just father and me for many years." A shadow crossed her face. "His death left me adrift." This position in Fort Davis seemed like providence. Ryder understood the feeling of being set loose from one's moorings. He'd experienced something similar after the war, when returning to his family's farm in Missouri had felt impossible. The memories of what he'd seen and done during those bloody years had driven him west, seeking a place where no one knew his name or his history. "And Penny?" he asked, changing the subject. "She seems well-trained for a schoolteacher's mount." Abigail smiled fondly. "She was my father's. He taught riding at a gentleman's club in Philadelphia before his academic career. Penny is the last of his breeding stock, the only thing besides books that I kept after his death." On the 5th day after Abigail's arrival, Ryder returned from checking his property boundaries to find her in the corral with Penny. The mare was moving freely, her injured leg still bandaged but bearing weight more confidently. Abigail was brushing her coat, talking softly to the horse as she worked. The sight stirred something in Ryder, a feeling he'd thought long buried. Abigail's auburn hair gleamed in the afternoon sun, and her movements were graceful as she tended to her beloved horse. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like if she stayed, if her presence in his home weren't temporary. He pushed the thought away as quickly as it had come. She had a purpose in Fort Davis, a new life waiting to begin, and he had chosen solitude for good reasons, reasons that hadn't changed just because a beautiful, determined woman had temporarily entered his life. That evening, as they sat down to eat, Abigail broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Penny seems much improved," she said. "I think we might be able to travel to town in a few days." Ryder nodded, ignoring the unexpected tightness in his chest. "Probably so. Best not to rush it, though. Of course, she agreed quickly. I wouldn't risk her recovery. But I'm already weeks late for the position. The town council must be wondering if I've abandoned the opportunity entirely. I could ride back to town, let them know the situation, Ryder offered. Abigail considered this. That might be best. I'd hate for them to hire someone else in my absence. I'll go tomorrow, Ryder said, focusing on his plate. Anything specific you want me to tell them? Just that I'm recovering from a minor accident and will arrive as soon as possible. She paused. And perhaps you could check on the schoolhouse again, make note of what supplies I might need immediately. I can do that. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of their utensils against plates. Finally, Abigail spoke again, her voice softer than before. I want to thank you, Mr. O'Malley. Your kindness these past days has been unexpected and much appreciated. Ryder looked up, meeting her gaze. It's nothing anyone else wouldn't have done. We both know that's not true. Her smile was gentle but knowing. Many would have left us where they found us, or worse. He couldn't argue with that. The frontier could be a dangerous place, especially for a woman traveling alone. Well then, you're welcome. And it's Ryder. After sharing a roof for nearly a week, Mr. O'Malley seems overly formal. Ryder, she repeated as if testing the name. Then you must call me Abigail. Abigail, he echoed, surprised by how right it felt to say her name. The next morning, Ryder rode to town with a strange reluctance weighing on him. He delivered Abigail's message to the head of the town council, a banker named Hargrove, who seemed relieved that the new teacher had not abandoned them after all. Excellent news, Hargrove declared. The children have been running absolutely wild. Their parents are at their wits' end. She asked me to check the condition of the schoolhouse, Ryder said. Saw it briefly during my last visit. Needs work. Hargrove waved a dismissive hand. Minor repairs. Miss Newcomb will manage, I'm sure. We've allocated a small sum for supplies. Ryder frowned. Broken windows and a collapsing porch ain't minor repairs, especially with winter coming. The banker's smile tightened. Perhaps you'd like to contribute to the school fund, Mr. O'Malley. We're always accepting donations from civic-minded citizens. Perhaps I would, Ryder replied, surprising both Hargrove and himself. I'll take a closer look at what's needed and give you my assessment. At the schoolhouse, Ryder made a thorough inspection, listing the necessary repairs and materials. The building was in worse shape than he'd initially thought. The roof leaked in several places, the stove was rusted through, and rodents had made homes in the walls. Getting it ready for students would take significant work. As he made notes, Ryder found himself imagining Abigail's disappointment upon seeing the state of her new workplace. The town council clearly expected her to manage with minimal support, counting on her dedication to overcome the challenges they weren't willing to address. By the time he returned to his homestead, Ryder had formed a plan. He found Abigail in the barn with Penny, testing the mare's ability to bear weight on her healing leg. She's improving quickly, Abigail said, looking up as he entered. How was town? Did you speak with the council? Ryder nodded, setting down his saddlebags. They're expecting you whenever you're able to travel. Relieved you're still coming. And the schoolhouse? He hesitated, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm. Needs work, he admitted finally. More than they're prepared to do before you start teaching. Abigail's expression fell slightly, but she quickly recovered. I expected as much. I'll manage. You shouldn't have to manage with a leaking roof and broken windows. Ryder's voice was gruffer than he intended. Those folks have money for a new bank building but can't properly house their children's education. She looked at him with surprise. You seem upset on my behalf. Just don't like seeing someone set up to fail because others won't do their part, he said, turning to remove his horse's saddle. I won't fail, Abigail stated firmly. Whatever the conditions, I'll make it work. Ryder glanced back at her, noting the determined set of her jaw. I believe you would, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. He paused, then added, I'm going to fix up that schoolhouse before you start teaching. Abigail stared at him, clearly stunned by the offer. That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly accept. It's not charity, Ryder interrupted. It's practical. Those children deserve a safe, warm place to learn, and you deserve proper conditions to teach in. She studied his face, as if searching for his motivation. Why would you do this? You've already done so much. Ryder wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. He only knew that the thought of Abigail struggling in that dilapidated building through the coming winter was unacceptable to him. Let's just say I believe in your mission, he replied finally. Education matters, especially out here. The next week passed in a flurry of activity. While Penny continued to heal, Ryder made daily trips to the schoolhouse, repairing windows, patching the roof, and rebuilding the porch. Several townspeople, curious about his sudden interest in the school, stopped by to see his progress. A few even offered to help, surprised by the usually solitary rancher's community project. Abigail remained at the homestead, her presence transforming the cabin in subtle ways. Fresh wildflowers appeared on the table. Curtains fashioned from spare fabric hung at the windows, and the shelves were reorganized with an efficiency that somehow made the small space seem larger. In the evenings, Ryder would return dusty and tired, to find dinner waiting and Abigail eager to hear about his progress. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, revealing common interests and compatible viewpoints despite their different backgrounds. You never mentioned if you have family somewhere, Abigail said one night as they sat on the porch, watching lightning flicker on the distant horizon. Had a brother, Ryder replied after a moment. Lost him at Gettysburg. Parents passed before the war. I'm sorry. Her voice was soft with genuine empathy. Ryder nodded his acknowledgement. Been on my own since then. Suits me well enough. Does it? Abigail asked gently. You seem comfortable with company these days. The observation caught him off guard. It was true he'd grown accustomed to her presence, even looked forward to returning home knowing she would be there. The realization was unsettling. You're easy company, he said finally, not meeting her eyes. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the chorus of night insects and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Ryder was acutely aware of Abigail beside him, the light floral scent that somehow persisted despite the rustic surroundings, the graceful way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The schoolhouse should be ready in another few days, he said eventually, changing the subject. Windows are all fixed, roof doesn't leak anymore. Ordered new desks from the carpenter in town. You've gone far beyond what I expected, Abigail said. I don't know how to thank you properly. Seeing those children get a proper education will be thanks enough. Ryder stood, suddenly needing movement. It's getting late. Storm's coming in. As if on cue, a gust of wind swept across the porch, carrying the first spatters of rain. They hurried inside just as the skies opened, rain hammering against the newly repaired roof. Ryder built up the fire while Abigail lit the lamps, the cabin growing cozy as the storm raged outside. Penny will be all right in the barn? Abigail asked, glancing toward the window. She's secure. Barn sturdy. Ryder added another log to the fire. This storm might last through morning. The thought hung between them another day together, another day before Abigail would leave for her new position in town. Neither acknowledged the strange mixture of relief and disappointment that accompanied this realization. As Ryder prepared for sleep on his bedroll near the fire, Abigail sat at the table, writing in a small journal by lamplight. The domesticity of the scene struck him suddenly how natural it felt to share this space with her, how the cabin no longer seemed empty but full of life. Good night, Ryder, Abigail said softly, closing her journal and moving toward the bed. Good night, Abigail, he replied, watching as she disappeared behind the privacy screen he'd erected in the corner. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind puddles and a washed, clean brightness to the landscape. Ryder woke to find Abigail already up, making coffee on the stove. Her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, and she hummed quietly as she worked. "Been up long?" he asked, rising from his bedroll. She turned, smiling. "Just a little while. Thought I'd let you sleep." She poured him a cup of coffee. "You've been working so hard on the schoolhouse." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, a brief touch that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through him. Ryder stepped back, creating distance between them. "Should finish today," he said, focusing on the coffee. "Then you and Penny can head to town whenever you're ready." Abigail's smile faltered slightly. "Yes, of course. She's healing well. Dr. Reynolds, the veterinarian who stopped by the schoolhouse yesterday, said she should be fit to travel by tomorrow." The news should have pleased him, confirmation that his unexpected guest would soon continue to her destination as planned. Instead, Ryder felt a hollowness spreading in his chest. "Good," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'll get the last of the repairs done today then." The ride to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. At the schoolhouse, Ryder worked methodically, completing the remaining tasks with grim efficiency. Several townspeople stopped by, offering approval of his work and expressing excitement about the new teacher's imminent arrival. "You've done a fine job, O'Malley," Sheriff Wilson commented, surveying the transformed building. "Never figured you for the charitable type." Ryder continued hammering a loose board on the porch steps. "Just helping out." The sheriff studied him thoughtfully. "Heard the new teacher's staying at your place while her horse recovers. Miss Newcomb, is it?" "That's right." Ryder straightened, meeting the sheriff's gaze directly. "Found her injured on the trail. Mare was hurt too, couldn't leave them." Wilson nodded. "Course not. Just surprised is all. You usually keep to yourself." After a pause, he added, "She planning to stay in town once she starts teaching?" "Expect so. Council's arranged lodging with the widow Parker." "Decent arrangement," the sheriff acknowledged. "Though it's a shame." Ryder frowned. "What's a shame?" Wilson shrugged. "Just thinking it's been good to see you in town more often, getting involved. Place like Fort Davis needs solid men who care about more than just their own affairs." Before Ryder could respond, the sheriff tipped his hat and walked away, leaving him to consider the unexpected observation. By late afternoon, the schoolhouse was finished. Ryder stood back, surveying his work with satisfaction. The building looked better than it had in years, solid, welcoming, ready for a new beginning, just like its soon-to-be teacher. On the ride home, Ryder made a decision. It had been forming in his mind for days, perhaps since the moment he'd first seen Abigail slumped over her wounded mare. He just hadn't been ready to acknowledge it until now. He found her in the corral with Penny, testing the mare's movement. The horse was walking freely, her gait almost back to normal. "She's ready," Abigail announced as he approached. "We can leave for town tomorrow morning." Ryder nodded, leaning against the corral fence. "Schoolhouse is finished. Town's excited to meet you." "I can't thank you enough for all you've done." Abigail's smile was genuine, but tinged with something like sadness. "Not just for me, but for the children of Fort Davis. They're fortunate to have someone who cares so much about their education." "I care about a lot of things I didn't before you arrived," Ryder said quietly. Abigail stilled, her hand resting on Penny's neck. "What do you mean?" Ryder took a deep breath. "I mean that having you here has changed things. Changed me, maybe." He looked away, uncomfortable with his own vulnerability. "I've gotten used to not being alone." When he glanced back, Abigail was watching him intently, her expression unreadable. "Ryder." "You don't need to say anything," he interrupted. "Just know that you've made an impression on this place, on me." He straightened, trying to recapture his usual composure. "I'll help you pack your things for tomorrow." Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the barn, needing distance and time to regain his equilibrium. That evening, their final dinner together was quieter than usual, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. As they cleared away the dishes, Abigail finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she began carefully, "about the school and about arrangements." Ryder looked up, waiting. "The widow Parker's house is in town, which is convenient for the school, but I've always preferred open spaces." She glanced around the cabin. "Penny, too. Needs room to run once she's fully recovered. What are you saying? Ryder asked, barely allowing himself to hope. Abigail met his gaze directly. I'm wondering if there might be an arrangement that would allow me to stay here, at least sometimes. I could ride to town for school days and perhaps return here on weekends. She hesitated. If that wouldn't be an imposition. Ryder's heart hammered in his chest. No imposition, he managed, but it's a long ride each day, not practical in bad weather. I've never minded a challenge, she replied with a small smile, and I've grown attached to this place. Just the place? The question escaped before he could stop it. Abigail's cheeks colored slightly. No, she admitted softly, not just the place. The admission hung between them, transforming the air in the small cabin. Ryder took a step closer to her, then another, until they stood nearly touching. Abigail, he said, her name almost a question. In answer, she reached up, her hand gently touching his cheek. The simple contact broke something loose inside him, a dam of restraint he'd built over years of solitude. Ryder leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that began tentatively, but quickly deepened with shared longing. When they finally parted, Abigail's eyes were bright, her breathing uneven. I wasn't sure, she whispered. You're so reserved, and I thought perhaps I was imagining. You weren't imagining anything, Ryder interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. I just didn't think. I never expected to feel this way again, or maybe ever. She smiled up at him, her hand still resting against his face. Neither did I. After Father died, I thought my path was set to devote myself to teaching, build a new life alone. Then my horse was injured, and a stranger carried us both to safety. Her smile widened. A very handsome, kind stranger who pretends to prefer solitude but fixes schoolhouses and rescues lost teachers. Ryder couldn't help but return her smile, the unfamiliar expression feeling right on his face. What happens now? He asked. Now, Abigail replied thoughtfully. We figure out how the new schoolteacher of Fort Davis can fulfill her duties while also spending time with the man who has rather thoroughly captured her heart. I have a suggestion, Ryder said, taking her hands in his. The Parkers' place is next to the school, convenient for weekdays, but this land, my land, could be our home, yours and mine. We could build something here, together. Abigail's eyes widened. Ryder O'Malley, are you proposing to me after less than 2 weeks' acquaintance? I believe I am, he replied, surprising himself with his certainty. Unless you think it's too soon, she laughed softly. By conventional standards, absolutely. But out here, conventional doesn't always apply, does it? Her expression grew serious. I know my own heart, Ryder. It recognized something in you from the beginning, something true and steadfast. If you're certain. I've never been more certain of anything, he said firmly. I love you, Abigail Newcomb. I think I have since you opened your eyes and asked about your mare before yourself. Tears shimmered in her eyes. And I love you, Ryder O'Malley. My rescuer, my friend, my future. Their second kiss was deeper than the first. A promise sealed between them as the Texas sun set beyond the windows, painting the room in golden light. The following day, they rode to town together, side by side. Penny moved easily, her injury healing well enough for the journey. In Abigail's saddlebag was a letter of acceptance for the teaching position, modified to explain her living arrangements. They would face questions and raised eyebrows, no doubt, but Abigail was determined, and Ryder found he no longer cared about town gossip. At the schoolhouse, several parents and children had gathered, eager to meet the new teacher. Abigail dismounted gracefully, greeting each person with warm interest, while Ryder hung back, watching with quiet pride. Miss Newcomb, Hargrove called, hurrying across the street. At last, we were beginning to despair. He glanced at Ryder, then back to Abigail. I see Mr. O'Malley has been looking after you. He has indeed, Abigail replied with a smile. In fact, Mr. O'Malley and I have come to an arrangement. She held out her hand, and Ryder stepped forward to take it. We're to be married. The announcement caused a ripple of surprise among the gathered townspeople. Hargrove's eyebrows shot up nearly to his hairline. Married? But you've only just arrived in Fort Davis. Sometimes, Ryder said, finding his voice, you don't need much time to recognize what matters. Sheriff Wilson pushed through the crowd, grinning broadly. Well, now, this is unexpected but welcome news. O'Malley here's been needing someone to smooth his rough edges for years. Laughter rippled through the group, breaking the initial shock. Soon, they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and invitations to dinner. The women immediately began discussing wedding plans, while the men clapped Ryder on the back with knowing smiles. Through it all, Abigail remained by his side, her hand in his, her presence a steady anchor in the sea of social interaction that would normally have overwhelmed him. When she glanced up at him, eyes bright with happiness, Ryder knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right decision. The wedding took place a month later, a simple ceremony in the newly repaired schoolhouse. By then, Abigail had won over the town with her intelligence, kindness, and dedication to her students. The children adored her, parents respected her methods, and even Hargrove had come around to accepting the unconventional arrangement whereby the schoolteacher lived outside town with her rancher husband. Penny had recovered fully, joining Ryder's horses in the expanded corral he'd built to accommodate her. The mare seemed content in her new home, as did her mistress, who balanced teaching duties with learning the rhythms of ranch life. As winter settled over Fort Davis, bringing crisp nights and occasional snowfall, the O'Malley homestead grew warmer and more inviting. Abigail added feminine touches to the cabin curtains, rugs, and paintings, while Ryder built additional rooms in preparation for the family they hoped to create together. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after their chance meeting on the Texas plains, they sat together on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching stars appear in the vast western sky. "Any regrets?" Ryder asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Abigail leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "None whatsoever, though I do wonder sometimes." "What's that?" She smiled up at him. "What would have happened if Penny hadn't been injured, if we had made it to Fort Davis without incident?" Ryder considered this. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway, maybe at a town social or a school event." "You, at a town social?" Abigail laughed. "Highly unlikely." "For you," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I would have made an exception." Inside the barn, Penny nickered softly, as if in agreement. The mare had brought them together, her injury the catalyst for a love neither had been seeking, but both had desperately needed. "I'm glad it happened as it did," Abigail said after a moment. "Those first days here, watching you tend to Penny with such care, I saw the man you truly are, patient, gentle, skilled." Ryder pulled her closer. "And I saw a woman of extraordinary courage and determination. How could I not fall in love with you?" As they sat together, watching night deepen over their land, both silently acknowledged the strange fortune that had brought them together: a wounded mare, a chance encounter, and two hearts ready, despite past sorrows, to begin again. In the years that followed, the O'Malley homestead flourished and expanded. Abigail continued teaching at the Fort Davis School, her students' achievements becoming legendary throughout the county. Ryder's ranch grew prosperous under their combined efforts, and their family expanded with the birth of 2 children who inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's quiet strength. Penny lived out her days in contentment, eventually joined by a foal of her own who carried Abigail's children on their first rides across the Texas plains. And on each anniversary of their meeting, Ryder and Abigail would ride together to the spot where he had first found them, a wounded mare, and her determined rider, who had transformed his solitary existence into a life rich with love, purpose, and joy.